Okay, my friends, today we have a very special guest here with me. I will be chatting with Robert David Steele. He is a commissioner and the Chief Counsel for the International Tribunal of Natural Justice, which recently held hearings in Westminster, England on pedophilia. In 2017, Robert was recommended for the Nobel Peace Prize for his work on true cost economics. He's the pro bono Chief Enabling Officer of Earth Intelligence Network, a 501c3 devoted to teaching holistic analytics. He's also the CEO of Open Source Everything, a for-profit that seeks to help all countries. He's the author of 8 books on intelligence reform, 2 books on electoral reform. He has numerous Kindle books. He has served as a Marine in the Marine Corps and was part of the intelligence community for 20 years. None of those years were served as a clandestine CIA officer. He is responsible for creating the Marine Corps Intelligence Activity. He was an external researcher for the U.S. Army Strategic Studies Institute. And as a private citizen, he ran as president a few years ago and created #OnRig to give the power back to the people through election reform. And he has tried on numerous occasions to contact President Trump to get his attention on certain initiatives. We'll be talking about that. So Robert, it's really an honor and a privilege to have you with us today. Thank you very much for being here.
Thank you, Paul. Ask me anything.
Okay, let's start off with some of the more topical issues. This huge migration from South America that's creeping up to our borders. There's apparently 5,000 to 7,000 migrants. Some of them probably ISIS, MS-13. Who do you suppose is funding this, and what is the purpose behind it all?
I think that the caravan, the bombs that were delivered today, and the Khashoggi incident are all deep state provocations. These are all intended to make our president look bad right before the election, and they're all intended to force our president into making a huge mistake. In my view, the caravan started with someone offering people money and telling them they would get a special reception in the United States. Obviously, someone is providing food and water and supplies and maybe even porta potties all the way along. So this is a well-funded, well-organized effort. And our president has, I think, responded brilliantly. All of these people are going to be intercepted on the way back. And in fact, there's discussion now of the president providing military transports so that Mexico will sort these people by country and will fly them home and will reduce the assistance to those countries by the cost of our providing military transports to take these people home. They're not going to get to the border. They're not going to get across the border. This, if anything, makes the president look good in the face of a provocation. Now, Khashoggi, the same thing. I think this was a plot by Prince Bandar and Prince Turkle with the Zionists. The Zionists are terrified of the Saudi king telling the world what he told Ambassador Robert Jordan, which is that the Zionists did 9/11. So I think Khashoggi was lured to the embassy in part because he thought he was going to get a whole bunch of money to run a media campaign in order to help support a coup by Bandar and Turkey against MBS and the king. Somewhere in there, I think this flipped over, or the plan was, in fact, to kill Khashoggi but make it look like it was done by MBS. And that was going to be an atrocity that would force Trump to make a mistake and would also ease the way for the coup. I have a number of different sources that have posted on this, and your listeners can find our entire Khashoggi write-up, which has many updates, at tinyurl.com/Steele-Khashoggi. And Steele with a capital S, Khashoggi with a capital K, and it's KHA and then SHOGGI. Some people misspell it.
Okay, fine. So I suppose 9/11 is really the clincher here, the holy grail. If we can get to the bottom of 9/11, then everything else will fall into place.
Well, we've already gotten to the bottom of 9/11. The president knows exactly what happened on 9/11. In fact, most congressmen, to their eternal shame, knew exactly what happened on 9/11. 9/11 was a commercial insurance fraud that started in 1988. And 9/11, the Twin Towers were owned by the states of New York and New Jersey. The governors of New York and New Jersey at the time are complicit in converting this commercial insurance fraud into a terrorist event in full partnership with George H.W. Bush and Dick Cheney. The president has received 28 memoranda, and your listeners can find exactly what the president received at the White House on the 8th of August by going to tinyurl.com/911-POTUS, P-O-T-U-S, for President of the United States. This is beyond dispute. The Zionists have been planning this since 1988. However, they would never have succeeded unless George H.W. Bush and Dick Cheney decided that they needed a terrorist event in the year 2000. They stole the election from Al Gore in part to make sure that Dick Cheney was in charge of all national security on 9/11. The people that should hang on this are, I would say, in priority order, George H.W. Bush, Dick Cheney, Governor Pataki, Rudy Giuliani, and then Benjamin Netanyahu, Larry Silverstein, and all of the Zionists that essentially planned and executed 9/11.
Is there any talk of any tribunals coming up, military tribunals?
It's interesting. I have no direct knowledge, but I do observe that Lindsey Graham has been born again. Senator Graham now, who used to be best pals with Senator McCain, who has now gone to the afterlife on a scheduled basis. Lindsey Graham has become President Trump's water carrier in the Senate, and that's a good thing. All things are forgiven from the past. Lindsey Graham has now become priceless. And the exchange that he had with Judge Kavanaugh on military tribunals during the hearings are an absolutely essential complement to the rumored or documented, I'm not sure which, because I'm really not certain how many sealed indictments there are, but there are a number of sealed indictments. You combine that plus the military tribunal discussion during the hearings, plus the upgrade of Guantanamo from a tent city for terrorists to a Marriott courtyard for elite traitors. And I think you have the makings of Donald Trump doing something very significant immediately after the midterms.
Well, what are the repercussions of such, an initiative? I mean, sure, he would like to clean up, house, but what are the repercussions? This is a chess game. Can he do it with impunity?
It's not a question of impunity. It's a question of justice, Paul. Let me say that I believe that however many sealed indictments there are, I believe that 95% of them will never be opened. They're simply a pressure point. Everybody who's been evil, the bankers, the elite pedophiles, the people who are working for Israel and Saudi Arabia and other countries, but particularly the dual citizens of Israel who are traitors to the U.S. government, all of them know that if they cross the president, there is a Ranger battalion that will put a bayonet up their ass and take them to Guantanamo. So they are being sidelined. My personal estimate is that the president doesn't need to take down more than 100 people. 100 people. That's the core of the 1% of 1% that represents the Rothschilds, the Vatican, and the Chabad supremacist court. And I will say that Chuck Schumer and Debbie Wasserman Schultz are in that number.
So these people at the upper layers of the echelon, they have gotten the message, obviously. They know what's up. They know that it's checkmate if they do anything other than follow,
Again, you have to distinguish between the 95% that have been sidelined and the 5% that are absolutely terrified. These people are doing everything. In fact, later today, we're going to have a post about a raid on an American nuclear facility in the last few days. It is being blamed on the Saudis. I don't believe that for a minute. I think it's a Zionist operation. And just as the Zionists framed the Muslims for 9/11, I think the Zionists are seeing that the Khashoggi thing is not going the way they wanted. The caravan thing is not going the way they wanted. So now they're going to trot out the Saudis stole your nuclear stuff.
Right.
Okay. Then they're going to have a nuclear event in the Middle East that they're going to blame on the Saudis. So do not ever estimate. And let me say with very strong feelings of respect and earnestness, I love the Mossad. They're serious professionals. And I find it very, very important that after everyone retires from the Mossad, they turn against Benjamin Netanyahu. The man is a war criminal. He should be in jail or sent to an early death by his own people. Certainly, I don't recommend any U.S. action. Bottom line here is that I believe the Zionists are over in the United States of America. And at phi-beta-iota.net, we've published 22 Zionist strikes. Normally takes 3 strikes to strike out, but they're up to 22 now. And if people go to phi-beta-iota.net and they search for Zion, Z-I-O-N, strike, they'll get right to the 22 strikes. My bottom line, Donald Trump cannot deal with the Zionists until he's dealt with the American deep staters. However, whether Trump is or is not successful against Zionism in the next 4 years, somebody else will be. Zionism in the United States of America is over, and it is not to be confused with Judaism. Zionism bad, Judaism good.
No, I agree with you 100%. There's a vast difference, a world of difference between the Zionists and the Jews, the good-hearted people that we know as the Jewish nation, which, you know, they're good people in a bad system, as you've put it so often. What do you think of Larry Silverstein's proclamation? He was talking in front of a group of Jewish nobility, I guess, and he was explaining to them that as early as April 2000, he had the blueprints for the new World Trade Center, which was to be rebuilt in 2000.
Larry Silverstein is dirty, 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 but he would not have been able to do all of this without Dick Cheney and George Bush. I believe that Larry Silverstein knew as early as 1990 that the Twin Towers were going to be brought down in a catastrophic terrorist event that was going to be blamed on the Muslims. From 1990, the Zionists have been planning this. Now, we have a number of memos, and we know with certainty that Larry Silverstein and Governor Pataki and Rudy Giuliani and all these other people, they knew that the Twin Towers could not be brought down in the normal way by controlled demolitions because there was too much asbestos, too much other toxic material. And therefore, the EPA, under various presidents, had said, you must bring this down one piece at a time with reverse deconstruction. They were looking at a $2 billion bill. And people can find the memorandum if they go to phi-beta-iota.net. Just look up Tom-Scott Gordon, Tom-Scott Gordon. Or they can go to tinyurl.com/911-POTUS and then see the memo there, which is online in full text so that people can translate it into Russian and every language except Farsi, actually.
Right.
So bottom line here is, I want to emphasize that Larry Silverstein is certainly the primary actor in making all of this happen, but he is not the ringleader. The ringleader is George H.W. Bush and Dick Cheney. And as much as I feel it compellingly necessary to tell the American public that the Zionists carried this out, Benjamin Netanyahu was bold enough to put it into his book in 1994. He predicted that the Twin Towers would come down. And people like John Deutsch and Andrea and Carter and Philip Zelikow, they're all traitors, in my opinion. They should be investigated. Obviously, everyone's innocent until proven guilty, but I think they're all traitors.
How many of them were dual citizens?
Probably all of them, but they staged seminars. Harvard and Stanford have no ethics whatsoever. Harvard and Stanford University both manage major events speaking about catastrophic terrorism, and all of them leading up to the cover story for 9/11. Blame it on the Muslims. The 1993 event, the car bomb, was a prequel to start setting people's minds toward Muslims want to take down 9/11. That was, in fact, an event that was orchestrated by the FBI. And it was totally part of the deep state Zionist FBI, Bush-Cheney crime family plan to use the Twin Towers in the year 2000 as a catastrophic terrorist event with 3 goals. Number 1, to launder $240 billion from the Cold War against Russia. That's a memo in there. Number 2, to justify eternal war in the Middle East and elsewhere. Number 3, to justify a police state. Michael Chertoff, who is almost certainly a dual citizen and almost certainly a traitor who works for Israel rather than America, when he was named director or secretary of the Department of Homeland Security, he did 2 big things. Number 1, he controlled all the communications and computing so that the 9/11 story was buried in partnership with Mueller at the FBI. Mueller's primary responsibility at the FBI was to cover up for Dick Cheney. That's all he did as director of the FBI. But the other thing that Chertoff did was put Israeli Zionist software companies in at the bottom underlying layers for all law enforcement communications and computing across this country. The Zionists own the 26 communication systems in the White House. They own NSA. They own every law enforcement communications and computing system across this country. And that's because DHS basically opened a door for the Zionists to come in and do for underlying America at the state and local level what they had already done with Promise from Robert Maxwell and others, and then follow-on software programs at the national level.
So they have a back door on everything.
Yes, and I really have to emphasize the United States of America is never going to be prosperous, and it is never going to be at peace unless we eradicate the Zionist parasite in our economy, our entertainment system, our mass media, our social media, and of course our educational system and our government.
Right. Right. And also we should remind our viewers that Chertoff summarily released the 5 Israelis that were apprehended on 9/11. These were the dancing Israelis, as they're well known.
Oh, Chertoff covered up for Israel across the board. The other thing you have to remember is that the Saudis, who were really logisticians, the Saudis provided the passports for the patsies. And John Brennan, who was never a clandestine case officer, as chief of station in Saudi Arabia, is the one who is said to have signed the visa exceptions for every patsy. Okay, these guys did not take down the Twin Towers. The Twin Towers were taken down with pre-planted explosives, possibly nuclear. And again, the memos on the various options are in our memorandums to the president. But
Right.
I would point out to people that immediately after 9/11, every Saudi of importance in the United States was put on a plane at a time when all airplanes were grounded.
Yeah.
Every Saudi was put on a plane and flown first class out of the United States of America. Now compare that with how we're reacting to the Saudis over Khashoggi, which is a contrived event. The Saudis are being framed for Khashoggi. Khashoggi is a deep state Zionist provocation. It should not be blamed on the king or on MBS. And I think Donald Trump, God bless him, has demonstrated enormous gravitas and patience and measured intelligence. And he's not falling for it. He's not falling for the caravan either.
Right.
So I guess I would end this by saying I'm very, very frustrated because the Federal Bureau of Investigation is not doing its job. They're part of the deep state. They're not serving the public.
Right.
And I noticed that you're wearing an FBI hat as a joke.
Well, actually, it was a company I used to own called the Fitness Bureau Incorporated. But anyway, it should say FBSI to make it more succinct. The other thing is this whole thing about the Rothschilds, controlling central banks. As far as we know now, there's only maybe, 4 countries that don't have a central bank that's owned by the Rothschilds.
Or that they've nationalized it. Look, it's not so much that it's owned by the Rothschilds. The Rothschilds, the Vatican, and the Chabad supremacist cult have basically a global network of control that relies on gold and blackmail. And pedophilia is a huge part of it, which is why I was very interested in becoming chief counsel for the International Judicial Commission of Inquiry into Human Trafficking and Child Sex Abuse. I've learned an enormous amount.
As you said, pedophilia is the glue that keeps it all together, right?
Well, pedophilia and murderous pedophilia. I mean, a hit job was done on me by a media outfit that I believe is run by a person who is terrified that he is going to be found out to be a murderous pedophile. So I think that people really have no idea of the depth and breadth of the evil that goes on in every neighborhood. I mean, I think there are pedophiles every block, and there's a kill room every 10 blocks. It's that bad. I am extraordinarily distressed that we've had to come this far to start realizing just how much evil lurks among us. But Donald Trump, God bless him, is a breath of fresh air. And whether he succeeds or not, I don't think the deep state is ever again going to regain control.
Right. Coming back to central banks, you know, this has been a pervasive problem with central banks from the get-go. When we had the inception period of America, as you well know, Andrew Jackson tried to do away with a central bank. We had Lincoln try to do away with that. He tried to borrow against to finance the war, and they were charging him 36%. He said, enough of that, I'm going to start greenbacks. And he was going to continue with that plan. And obviously they tried to stop him. They killed him. Garfield had the same problem. And then we've got Woodrow Wilson. The amazing thing about Woodrow Wilson is that the Federal Reserve Bank Act was passed on December 23rd with only 3 Senate votes. There was no objection to that act at all. So here we are, 2018, with a central bank that controls the economy, basically. They can pull the plug at any point they want and create a depression like they've done in the past.
Well, yes and no. Yes and no. I think our president is much smarter than that. I'm expecting a gold-backed dollar to be announced before Election Day. You could actually lock the entire Federal Reserve up. You could take all the Federal Reserve presidents and put them in Guantanamo, and then subject them to deep interrogation, because they're actually part of a criminal conspiracy. Wayne Jett wrote an excellent book called Fruits of Graft that documents that the Federal Reserve, the central bank, the banks planned the Depression with the complicity of Democratic President Franklin Delano Roosevelt. The Democratic president was complicit in the Great Depression. And they had 3 purposes, according to Wayne Jett, who is an economist in his beautifully documented, very big hardcover book. Purpose number 1 was to destroy the middle class that was demanding political power. Purpose number 2 was to buy up America at depression-level prices. And purpose number 3 was to consolidate control over the federal government. Now, rumor has it that Trump has survived 12 assassination attempts. Some of those are kind of marginal, where basically the Secret Service has gone and wiped out an ISIS person, who is in the same country. But I believe Donald Trump has, in fact, triumphed in surviving for 2 years. He's done a great deal more behind the scenes than the mainstream media has been willing to acknowledge. The Washington Examiner is the only newspaper that has properly documented the president's accomplishments. And I think that Donald Trump is going to nationalize the Federal Reserve before the end of his first term. And I had this discussion. I was in ASEAN. I was the supporting actor for a documentary on pedophilia with Steven Seagal. And I was in Thailand. The Thais heard I was there. They marched me past a whole bunch of retired generals and prime ministers. And we had the discussion, what should we do about our central bank? Because they've all noticed that in the Philippines, Duterte has basically run the Rothschilds out of town. The Philippines is also sitting on vast stores of gold that the Japanese buried there during World War II. And I said, I think every country in the Association of Southeast Asian Nations, ASEAN, every country in ASEAN should nationalize its central bank on the same day. I think that's coming. And we're starting
Okay.
to see some serious discussion in that direction. Central banks are neither central nor federal nor national. They don't work in the public interest. They're basically legalized looting.
They are the trough from which both parties feed off, right? I mean, they don't care which party is in power, because eventually what they really want is wars and squalor, because squalor requires borrowing from the government, and wars, of course, that's endless borrowing there. We
Well,
see the national.
they thrive on chaos. And I would like to emphasize that the reason that Cynthia McKinney and I started #OnRig is because 70% of the American voters are completely disenfranchised by the two-party tyranny. And I credit Teresa Amato, whose wonderful book, The Grand Illusion, The Myth of Voter Choice in a Two-Party Tyranny, was the first book that legitimized the term two-party tyranny. The Democrats control 17% of the US voters, the Republicans 13%. Okay? So that's 30%. Another 20% of US voters are active, but they're futile. Libertarians, Greens, Independents, Constitution, Reform, working families, justice, they're futile. And then 50% of the American voters don't vote at all because they know it's a rigged system. The single biggest mistake Donald Trump has made in the last 2 years is to not reach out to the 99%, to not pursue election reform and promise every libertarian, every green, every independent that they will get a fair shot. Here's my bottom line. I want election reform, #OnRig, so that in 2020 we not only re-elect Donald Trump, we also elect 1/3 of Congress, where that third is neither Democrat nor Republican. That ends the possibility of either of the two parties, one bird, two wings, same crap, either of them controlling Congress. That forces Congress to start making evidence-based decisions. And part of election reform, of course, is it eliminates lobbyists, and it also puts democracy in the workplace. It restores unions. We reverse Taft-Hartley 14B. We basically restore democracy in the working place, not only in government. So there's a lot to be done. But bottom line for me is Donald Trump will not make America great again unless he passes #OnRig, the Election Reform Act, and puts the public back into public government. Right now, we don't have the public in public government. We have two criminal classes, one called Republican, one called Democrat.
Well, with all due respect to Donald Trump, as much as he has been able to do in the last 2 years, as you said, he has done more than 10 other people combined could have done. But he's also accomplished maybe 1/10 of what he could potentially have done had he had the vision and the insight, and had he listened to certain people like yourself.
Paul, now let me make a point here. Donald Trump is the first president to accomplish everything he's accomplished in the face of total resistance. All prior presidents were blessed by the deep state, including Ronald Reagan. And so all prior presidents had accomplishments that occurred because they were not fighting World War III at the same time. Donald Trump's major accomplishments are particularly stellar because he's accomplished these things in the face of total resistance, okay? Now, he could accomplish 10 times more if he had the public on his side. For example, I don't understand why he's still using Twitter, because Twitter is part of #Google Gestapo. They're limiting him to 4 million members. They're limiting his reach and retweets to 25% of what he's capable of. He doesn't know how to use polls. He should have a truth channel. He should have his own trumpets that reach 200 million Americans on an opt-in basis. He should be able to poll every American and say, what do you think about closing all our bases overseas? What do you think about pulling out of NATO? What do you think about nationalizing the Federal Reserve? What do you think about legalizing marijuana? And when the president uniquely has inputs from, let's say, 50 million, if that's what participate, he can then go to Congress and say, hey, this is what your constituents are saying. And I'm going to be in your district next week. And if you don't get with the program, I'm going to put you out of office.
He has an opportunity, a huge opportunity here to do something that has never been done before. We can go back to the founding fathers, if you will, and compare him to a founding father. And I also view you as a founding father of sorts, because you are trying to remake America, reset America, reboot America into America 2.0, where we have a participatory democracy where the public, the voters, are involved in the process, and they have a transparency that has never been had before, where they can actually see and vote on and be polled on different issues. So
Paul, it's not just transparency, it's also education. Uh,
education, yeah.
one of the problems we have is that we have been deliberately dumbed down over the last 50 years. We've been dumbed down chemically. Fluoride is one way in which we've been dumbed down. The sperm count is down. Alzheimer's, thank you, Monsanto. I believe that Alzheimer's and Parkinson's disease are a variation of mad cow disease, which is thank you, Monsanto. Okay? All of the crap that we've been putting into pesticides and so forth has then come up into animals, which has gone to humans, and it's basically had neurological as well as gut impacts. So we haven't been doing true cost economics. Nobody has been held accountable for truly understanding what the implications are for interfering with God's nature.
Correct. If you were,
The biggest problem that I have is that too many people across America have become stupid. They are in a polarized mindset, and they're not capable of having a fact-based conversation. And this is true of Republicans as much as it is of Democrats. But I think the Democrats are the lower end of the spectrum. If you look at all of these fat, misbehaving, grotesque Antifa children in Portland, this is a disgrace to America. I mean, these people are disgusting. And I really like Donald Trump's new tagline, jobs, not mobs. And part of the problem is that the Democratic approach to government is to give everybody a handout to buy their vote. And so that's why you get all these fat, stupid children in Portland. The Republican approach is to give people the freedom to make money and not be taxed to death. I don't support either of these two parties being in control past 2020. I want Greens and Libertarians and Independents in Congress, and I want a truly representative Congress where every American is both educated and participating.
Yeah, you know, you said it all here. I think, you know, the two-party duopoly, the solution of choice that we think we have, has to go at some point. And let me ask you this, theoretically speaking, if we had the founding fathers back here with us, you know, Washington, Madison, Hamilton, and they saw the technology that we have at our disposal, how do you think they would have used it to enhance the republic so it can be truly an of, by, and for the people republic?
Well, let me point out that the founding fathers were of, by, and for rich people with property. Okay. They weren't actually of, by, and for example, slaves or Indians. I mean, we genocided the American Indian. We have kept black people down for centuries. I would also point out to you that too many of our founding fathers were Freemasons, and they believed in secret societies. Now, secret societies were necessary at one point in time to basically work against the king and against repressive regimes. But I think at this point in time, I will take just one sentence from one founding father, Thomas Jefferson: a nation's best defense is an educated citizenry. Now, when I look at Crap News Network and Washington Compost and New York Crimes, these are criminal organizations. They are spewing crap. They are actually harmful to the democracy. And the same is true of just about everybody else. I mean, occasionally U.S. News and World Report and Los Angeles Times, Boston Globe, they'll have a decent article here and there. But by and large, our mainstream media and our television channels are crap. I mean, we have My 600-Pound Life and Vanna White and Wheel of Fortune. And I mean, the amount of garbage that the average American is subjected to on a 24-hour basis is it's no wonder we've become an idiot nation. So that all needs to be fixed. And I think a truth channel is in some ways a public broadcasting station done right. I mean, PBS is corrupt. The History Channel is doing some interesting things. Their whole series on aliens is a soft disclosure, okay? But History Channel did not have the balls to do a series on the deep state. They had a chance. History Channel considered it. They said, no, we don't want to go there. History Channel debriefed a New York police department, NYPD detective who had all the dirt on everybody, and they held it. They spiked the story, just like the New York Times has spiked stories to protect particularly evil past presidents.
Right.
And so forth.
I know you have recommended to President Trump having presidential firesides where he can educate the people, bring them up to speed. If we were to look at congressional districts combined with a truth channel where the public can integrate their opinion, their views on issues, and the representatives can follow suit, or if they don't follow suit, they can be recalled, and then also have with that a Trump truth channel, if you will, or whatever you want to call it. Do you think that would work?
I like that idea, Paul, and I particularly like the idea of creating an educational capability at the district level. However, first, you have to do two things to fix the districts. Number one, you have to have all the districts be computer designed and not gerrymandered, which is how they are now. And number two, you have to include in the census citizenship, because California has 4 congressmen it would not have if we were not counting illegal aliens and foreigners. The current distribution of congressional districts is based on counting every adult, including illegal aliens and foreigners. So we need to redraw all of the districts across the country, and that's part of the Election Reform Act. And we need to redo the census so that the districts are assigned based only on eligible adult voters.
And you are for paper ballots, correct?
Absolutely. Paper ballots counted publicly on site. Your listeners can find the 12 election reform recommendations. This is a starting point for national conversation. It's not a take it or leave it prescription. Your listeners can find all of this at unrigged.net.
Some people
Unrigged.net.
Unrig.net. Some people will say, though, okay, let's have the paper ballots, but at some point, the tallying, the score, will have to be digitalized. It will have to go into a computer, no? Yes or no?
Yes, but if you count the paper ballots publicly on site, the numbers are announced publicly.
Ah.
You also have exit polls, because we've seen cases where the numbers are counted at a local level and they get to the state level and all of a sudden they're completely different numbers. And of course, all of these electronic voting machines were designed for fraud. They use something called fractional voting so that you can actually determine the winner before the first vote is counted. So all of the election voting machines by 2020 need to be gone.
What would you do with the CFR, Trilateral Commission, and all the other stratospheric societies up there?
I would expose them for the frauds they are and shut them out. Most of them are intellectual whores.
So that's basically it. The IRS is an arm of the Federal Reserve, as I understand it. It's the collection arm. And I think it was incorporated in 1933 in Delaware, if I'm not mistaken.
I don't know, and I don't want to go there.
Yeah.
Under my plans for 2020 and 24, the IRS will be eliminated. The federal income tax will be eliminated. We will reverse the 16th and 17th Amendments, which, by the way, may not have been properly ratified. That's one of the problems, is it's too easy in America for a lie to have a long history. For example, it's a lie that the Supreme Court gave corporations personality. That was actually manufactured after the fact, and the records don't support it. Right. Corporations should not have personality. And these senior people, I've just finished reading a wonderful book called Skin in the Game. We should not allow corporate leaders to avoid liability for being both stupid and criminal. We need to get back to the whole issue of people like Rubin, for example. He made a whole bunch of mistakes that cost billions and billions of dollars, and he never had to pay a penny back. from the billions that were given to them. So liability is coming down the road. But bottom line here is the federal government should be a service of common concern to the sovereign states. We need to restore the senators as representatives of the sovereign states. Money should be collected in a bottom-up fashion as a transaction tax, and local counties should forward money to the states. The states should give money to the federal government only after a balanced budget has been presented and approved by the senators acting in their capacity as the representatives of the sovereign state. The time of imperial federal empire is over, and the time of Wall Street, the Rothschilds, the Vatican, the Chabad supremacist cult controlling our economy, that's over too.
I love it. Let me ask you this. With regards to taxation at the local level, what do you think of imposing, well, at the Wall Street level, how about imposing a 1% transaction tax on all transactions?
I'm saying transaction tax. Edgar Feige, Professor Edgar Feige from Wisconsin is still alive. He created the automated payment transaction tax. Anybody can look it up online. It's a tiny fractional tax. In fact, the tax rate can be set by the public at the locality, the state, or the national level. And if you want to go to war, the public has to vote to raise the tax to pay for the war, okay? But it's a transaction tax. No income taxes ever at any level.
Okay. So if we were to implement, let's say, open source economics, how would that reflect on the economy? Because I'm a bit fuzzy on that. How would it, if you were to have a computer model of that, how would it look?
You don't need a computer model. The short answer is that in combination, Ellen Brown's public banking and my open source everything engineering cut out the 90% of the cost that is profit for the banks. You can achieve everything Donald Trump wants to achieve in the way of infrastructure reconstruction, unlimited desalinated and decontaminated water, unlimited free energy. You can do all of that at 10% of the cost of the present Western economic model, which is why I've recommended it to General Secretary Xi Jinping in China and President Putin in Russia. Open source everything economics costs 10%. A John Deere tractor is a good example. A John Deere tractor costs $250,000 and has secret software that the farmer is not allowed to repair. And it's extremely expensive. When it breaks down in the field, you have to get a trailer and truck it to the factory where they do secret repairs at great expense. Dr. Marcin Jakubowski from Open Source Ecology has clearly documented that an open source everything tractor costs 10%, $25,000, and all of the parts are plug and play, repairable by the farmer, and many of the parts are plastic parts which can be printed in the farmhouse with plastic, with a 3D printer, okay? So we're talking a Western economic model which is 90% fraud, waste, and abuse versus an open source everything model which is 10%. I can give every person in Texas today that is starving and without clean water a good life at 10% of the cost.
Now, would that be rolled out over a period of time? Because what I'm thinking here is it would obviously impact the stock market. It may impact other factors like interest rates, the monetary supply, etc. How would that be rolled out? What's the ramp on here for that?
Well, let me say, first off, I'm totally against inflation. Inflation is a tax. Inflation is particularly a tax on poor people, and it's part of the Federal Reserve scam. They basically print money and use it to buy tangible assets, and then they count on inflation to basically make their numbers add up. I think inflation needs to stop. We need to end inflation. I really believe that over the course of a single decade, we could achieve all 17 of the Sustainable Development Goals that the United Nations, which I would like to throw out of New York, has identified. Bottom line here is that every single person can have all of the food and water and shelter and clothing that they need at 10% of the cost of the existing model. We are allowing ourselves to be screwed over by the 1%, and I think that's coming to an end, and I'm glad that I'm alive to see it.
I'm glad that you're alive too, Robert, and I really think you're doing more than anybody could possibly have done. Um, I know you sent a memorandum to the president on October 15th, and it's on your website, phi-beta-iota.net. You addressed it to the DOJ and several other agencies.
Oh, that's a separate memorandum. The president's got 6 memorandas from me. One of them was read by 4 million people.
Mm-hmm.
But he got his volumes on 9/11 and Sandy Hook separately. I realized that I had been remiss because Sandy Hook is actually something the Secretary of the Department of Homeland Security may not be aware of, because you have national security echelons and some of the cabinet members are lied to by their subordinates, and they're not fully briefed on some of the evil things that are done. So what I did with my letter, which is at sh-POTUS, to the Secretary, the Assistant Secretary General, and the Chairman of the Judiciary and Homeland Security Committees, I was focusing on what is now called legalized lies. The federal government today is authorized by Congress to lie. It can lie in its budget. It can lie across the board. In fact, the Department of Justice has claimed the right to lie to the courts. The Smith-Mundt Act was gutted by Obama, and it reversed the provision that made it illegal to lie to the public for propaganda purposes. So Sandy Hook is an example of what I believe to be a false flag attack created by the Federal Emergency Management Agency in order to instill fear in the public and justify a police state. And ultimately, under Obama, it was focused on an anti-gun agenda. So what I did with my letter, which everyone can find at phi-beta-iota.net and particularly at tinyurl.com/sh-POTUS, what I did with my letter was ring the bell on legalized lying. And I told these people that the 2020 presidential campaign is going to be all about 9/11, Sandy Hook, and legalized lying.
Yeah, I'm reading it here. Part of it says to cover up crimes against humanity and treason, including geoengineering by the CIA, NASA, FEMA.
CIA.
Pardon?
Geoengineering is not by the CIA. That's by the U.S. Air Force and NASA.
Well, I'm reading right from what you had on your website here. This will be
conflating words.
Okay. Okay. But
anyway,
I'm
going to pull it up now myself.
Okay, don't worry about it. It's not a big deal.
Yeah.
But you say to Donald Trump that if he will not finish the job, there are others who will. So is there a silver lining here that perhaps if maybe Trump does not finish the job, somebody else of your caliber?
Lining up. I mean, I'm having this conversation with people. And in fact, there's a plan right now. I personally want Trump to run in 2020. If he drops out and Pence runs, I absolutely will join a coalition against Mike Pence. Mike Pence cannot be trusted with the presidency. So I really have to emphasize, I support Trump. Now, I might run as a Republican in 2020.
Republican?
To pressure Trump on #unrig. If he does not do #unrig before 2020, I may run. And Cynthia McKinney might run as a Democrat, and John McAfee might run as a Libertarian, and someone other than Jill Stein, who has just faded into obscurity with her graffiti on Caterpillar tractors, someone other than Jill Stein will run as a Green. Now imagine this. Let's say Donald Trump does not do #unrig, which I hope he does, because all I want to do is help Donald Trump be the greatest president ever. Let's say he doesn't do it. Imagine 25 million hats in different colors with #unrig, red hats for the Republicans, blue hats for the Democrats, green hats for the Greens, brown hats for the Libertarians, gold hats for the Constitution Party, white hats for the Independents, all of them with #unrig. Now, imagine if Robert Steele, Cynthia McKinney, John McAfee, and whoever's running for the Green Party, maybe David Swanson, imagine if we're all telling our followers When you meet someone with a different hat, a different colored hat, ignore the color. Focus on #unrig. That is going to be the revolution that Donald Trump has failed to carry out in his first 2 years. Now, I
Brilliant.
want him to do it in his second 2 years, and I will help him if he asks me. If he doesn't, I was just told I'm going to be given $25 million to buy 25 million hats. They're
Okay.
$1 each from China.
Okay. Now, how long are you going to wait before you throw your hat in the race here?
Oh, I certainly don't want to do anything until February of 2020.
Okay.
But
Okay.
there is going to be a lot of stuff going on in background. I will not give up on trying to help Donald Trump. You know, it's really it's hard because he's surrounded by people. To take one example, Cynthia McKinney is a goddess. She is a 6-term congresswoman from Georgia who got along with the Ku Klux Klan.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
She's amazing.
But you know what it is, Robert?
Wait, let me finish my comment, please. So I approach Trump and I say, listen, Cynthia McKinney and I would like to come in and see you. And Trump is told by Steve Bannon and Reince Priebus, who's a traitor, he's told, oh my God, Cynthia McKinney, she's a communist. She's a Muslim terrorist sympathizer. And oh, Steele is a loose cannon and blah, 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 blah. The people around Trump have been telling him everything they can to get him to not talk to people who are trying to give him the information that he needs. Now, several books have documented that the president's information is being controlled. Jim Kelly is keeping stuff from the president, okay? I forget who the guy is, but someone actually stole a memo off the president's desk so the president wouldn't see it and sign it. The president lacks intelligence in the sense of decision support. The U.S. intelligence community is lying to the president. They're only covering 4% of what the president needs to know, according to General Tony Zinni. So the most important idea I've had for the president, apart from #unrig, is throw the scum press out of the White House. Don't waste real estate on the press. Turn that into a Trump studio, a grand strategy cell, and an open source agency that can provide the president and the public with the decision support they need on all threats, all policies, all costs. The president does not have that today.
No, he does not have the dashboard that he needs to make.
He doesn't even have the sources of information.
Or the intelligence. No, he's basically corralled, sequestered, as you put it, and people like yourself who want to help him, who have high ethics, who are principled people, who call a spade, as I mentioned to you before, they are shunned by his inner circle, that morass of controllers that want to keep him away from the truth, from true intelligence. Because a person like yourself would pull the rug from under them and call them for what they are.
I can't blame John Bolton for telling the president not to talk to me. I'm on record as saying that I think John Bolton is a traitor who works for Israel. And I'm also on record as saying that we should abolish the National Security Council. The National Security Council is how the deep state controls the White House. Okay? We should abolish the National Security Council and in its place put a very small national strategy working group. And it does strategy. It does not do micromanagement to suit Israel, okay? And this is another thing. Donald Trump, God bless him, ran on a platform of America first. The Washington Post just had a headline, and I took a screenshot of it because I think they'll realize their mistake and they'll change the headline. Speaking about Khashoggi, the Washington Post just had a headline that said, finally, bipartisan repudiation of America first. I don't make this stuff up.
Yeah.
The Washington Post was essentially saying, fuck the USA, we want what Israel wants.
Yeah. Well, therein lies the problem. I don't know if there will ever come a time, though, when you can have a president who will not be subject to control. Is that possible, viable, conceivable, plausible?
Absolutely possible. The trick is to A, have integrity, which I think Trump does. Trump has a very good reputation by 8th Avenue rules. In New York, you don't do construction without being respected by the mob, as well as politicians and banks. And to Trump's credit, he managed to thread the needle between the mob, the banks, and the politicians, and I guess the media.
Well, there's a lot of hand washing that goes on.
My thinking, please.
Yeah.
To be an honest president, you have to combine integrity, transparency, education for the public, and communication with the public. I mean, Trump's problem, and he realizes it, he has a shit communications team, okay, which is why he's out on the road now. He's his own communicator. He's his own Secretary of State. He's his own Secretary of Defense, because the system that he has is completely inadequate to what he needs. So bottom line is, if I were president, and I'd rather be vice president for education, intelligence, and research, but if I were president, I would be educating the public on everything, and I would be polling the public to the point that I could steamroll Congress publicly, transparently, in the public interest. Okay?
That's where it's at. That's where it's at.
That's exactly where it's at. I mean, my best book, although it was a little bit turgid, was On Intelligence, Spies and Secrecy in an Open World. I was the first to really understand that the spy world was basically imploding. Okay? It's the spy world is the IBM of information technology. But nobody wanted to hear it, because they wanted to be able to cut secret deals. Secrecy in the U.S. government is how you avoid accountability. It has nothing to do with protecting sources and methods. It's about avoiding accountability.
Avoid accountability and increase your budgets if you can.
It's a budget building exercise. Absolutely correct. I'm proud to know Bill Binney, and Bill Binney's the one who said at a conference we were at together, Hackers on Planet Earth in 2010, he said, NSA is not about protecting America. It's not about answering questions. It's about keeping the problem alive to keep the money moving. NSA is a corrupt organization. And one of the things Bill and I have agreed on is that we can cut 70% of NSA, 70% of the National Reconnaissance Office, 70% of the National Geospatial Agency, 70% of CIA, 70% of the Defense Intelligence Agency, 70% of the FBI, and then you roll all of those together into a new consolidated classified Central Intelligence Agency, where there is no competition between the disciplines and everyone works toward the same ends. And you complement that with an open source agency under direct control of the president and a National Intelligence Council that moves to the Office of Management and Budget or into the Executive Office of the Presidency. And 90% of what the National Intelligence Council works with is holistic analytics, true cost economics, open source intelligence, not something the CIA is capable of producing today.
That's the future, and the challenge at the same time to reposition America as the beacon of freedom, the America 2.0, to rebrand it, if you will. It's going to take a little bit of communication, marketing. People are going to have to know a little bit more about this overall plan. And unfortunately, we've got the mainstream media working against us. That's the problem. You know, you don't have the exposure that you need at this point in time.
Well, you're right. And part of the problem is that Congress has been bribed and blackmailed. I mean, every member of Congress is either being bribed or blackmailed one way or the other. There are no exceptions. Mm-hmm. And I include Rand Paul. He's being pressured in very subtle ways, although I think Rand Paul has a lot of potential. We're not making laws in the public interest. If we were making laws in the public interest, hashtag Google Gestapo would be under a racketeering investigation today. Amazon, Facebook, Google, Meetup, Twitter, and YouTube, as well as WordPress, Reddit, and a few other lightweights, would all be under a racketeering investigation. They would all be under criminal penalties for violating free speech as well as Title VII, the anti-discrimination laws. Okay? These people are all corrupt. The New York Times, I mean, the New York Times is no better than the Daily Beast now. Okay? The Daily Beast has published articles in which it said, this was one about David Seaman, who I happen to like. It said that David Seaman was writing about the non-existent global pedophilia network. The Daily Beast is full of crap. They're also paid to be full of crap, okay? These are illegitimate people who have no business calling themselves journalists. We're not holding people accountable for telling the truth. And part of the problem is that the standard for telling the truth is that you have to have malice when you tell a falsehood. And so there are a whole bunch of Supreme Court decisions, there are a whole bunch of legislative decisions, there are a whole bunch of executive decisions that have basically made it legal to lie in the United States of America. And that's why my letter to the Attorney General about legalized lying, they'll probably blow it off. They'll probably not pay attention to me. They will hear from me again in the 2020 election if Donald Trump doesn't take action first.
One thing I wanted to add here with regards to the necessary and proper clause that gives legislators such leeway, such latitude to create so many laws and bureaucracies.
They don't actually. Everything not defined in the Constitution is reserved to the states, but that has been violated with impunity.
Yeah, it's interesting that in 1791, Alexander Hamilton cited the necessary and proper clause to create the first central bank of the United States, citing that it would not infringe on the rights of any individual or any state. So if that is the case, if an issue does not infringe the right of a state,
but that's always a lie, okay? I mean, Israel was allowed to set up in Tel Aviv on the basis of it's not infringing on any Palestinian rights. So they've just genocided the Palestinians, just like we have genocided the Native Americans and the blacks.
Right. But my point is, how much more of a case can you make with that argument if you are to say, we need an integrated, let's say, congressional district online account for voters, for constituents to participate in this government so that we can make America into America 2.0 and integrate all those other principles and initiatives that you just outlined? Because it's, at the end of the day, without the people, you've got nothing. You've got.
Well, you're right, and let me make a point. I believe that there will be a lot of land confiscations or eminent domain repossessions. We have erred greatly, and so have many other countries around the world. Foreigners should not own land in the United States of America. Oh. In fact, absentee landlords should not own land in the United States of America. The federal government should not be allowed to own 90% of all the land west of the Mississippi. There is an enormous land opportunity in the United States of America if you could slash the federal holdings by 2/3, let's say by half. And I would start with a quarter, okay? I mean, priority one is election reform. We have to restore the power of the people. Priority two is the education of the people. Priority three is state rights. Priority four is land management and water management. Okay, we have killed this country. And we have killed this country by allowing the financialization of the economy and the federalization of the government. Elinor Ostrom got an excellent, a well-deserved Nobel Economics Prize for her book, Governing the Commons. And she discovered two things. The only people that know what the rules ought to be at the local level are the local people. And the only people who can enforce the rules at the local level are the people who are there, the local people. The more you move regulation and decision-making up, the stupider and more corrupt you get. So we need to localize, decentralize. We need to get back to villages. We need to get back to multi-generational families. Where the grandparents are helping care for the kids and everybody's together. We have fragmented America. We have tried to eradicate individualism. We have tried to eradicate family and community, and that is all part of this globalist agenda to basically fuck over everybody. And God bless Donald Trump, because he is, if anything, against this globalist agenda.
Well, the overall mandate of the globalists is really to break up America, to balkanize it if they can, so that it's no longer the United States. I call it the United States of Israel right now. But we also have a lot of land holdings that are owned by the Chinese. From what I understand, a lot of the western ports on the western coast here are controlled, managed by Chinese entities.
That's true. That's absolutely true. But one of the beautiful things about land is you add up enough people with pitchforks and there isn't an army on the planet that can take it back from you. Okay, we need to have, I mean, our president is right. China has basically been sucking the lifeblood out of the United States of America, but we've allowed that to happen. We have shipped our jobs overseas. We've allowed the Chinese to sell us cheap shit. I just had to throw away a weight scale because the Chinese weight scale worked with the battery that came with it, but it wouldn't work with any other battery being sold today because they had the conversion wrong. Both their battery and the weight scale were, the meeting points were wrong. Okay, we need to get back to local production. And again, let me give a real shout out to Marcin Jakubowski. If people want to see an original thinker who I really believe deserves a Nobel Peace Prize or a Nobel Prize for Economics, it's Dr. Marcin Jakubowski with a K. He's at Open Source Ecology. He's built the Global Village construction set, 50 open source machines, including a tractor. Nobody should be buying tractors from John Deere. They should be buying open source tractors that they can repair themselves. And now he's creating a new industrial factory of open source stuff, 3D printers and circuit makers and a whole bunch of other stuff. I mean, what he is doing is the future. And by the way, open source is the only thing that scales, and it's the only thing that avoids the true costs that are imposed on us by the banks and the lawyers. So we're at the beginning of a revolution here.
Right.
I hope it's a peaceful revolution. I feel very, very good about the next 30 years. And let me just end by saying, people don't understand that Donald Trump, Vladimir Putin, and Xi Jinping have already made decisions about the denuclearization of the Koreas and the denuclearization of Israel. And these decisions are going to play out over the next 10 years.
Okay, wonderful. That's very good news, Robert. It looks like a bright future from our vantage point. Let's hope that everything goes down as you predict and that you maybe have a shot. I hope you have a shot.
We'll see. I mean, I don't know if any of this money that I've been promised is going to come through. In the meantime, I'd certainly be glad for donations. I just spent $2,000 moving my website to Iceland, basically, so that it can't be shut down. And that's $2,000 I didn't have. So I'd be very glad to have people go to paypal.me/EarthIntel and donate whatever they can. It's tax deductible for U.S. taxpayers, and it starts a conversation with me because every donor gets an email from me, and thereafter I'll answer questions and have a conversation with them. So paypal.me/EarthIntel. It would be great to replenish that 2,000. Thank you.
And also, phibetaiota.net is your main site, and robertdavidsteele.com, is it?
Yes, and it's very simple. Anybody who goes to any search engine and looks up Robert David Steele will get right to my personal website at #1, and then I have all my websites listed at that website. So I'm easy to find on the internet. I'm an open book. Everything I write is free online. Which I say because there's about 1,000 Zionist trolls that follow me around and basically defame me. And I've got a federal lawsuit that will eventually come back and grab all these trolls by name through disclosure orders from the court to YouTube and Facebook and Twitter. So there are a lot of trolls that follow me around. I would like to be thought of as a person that is absolutely raising the bar. Donald Trump started with America first. Cynthia McKinney and I have taken that to not Israel first.
Beautiful, beautiful. Robert, my friend, God bless you in all that you do. From the bottom of my heart, I thank you. It's been really an honor and a privilege to meet you for the first time here online and to speak with you. You have such a depth of knowledge. If I was to compare ourselves, I'd be more like a pen flashlight, and you would be like a pulsar out there in space.
I don't think so. I honest to God, I stand on the shoulders of others. And I think one of the greatest things I've done for humanity is reviewed 2,500 books in 98 categories. And anybody that goes to phi-beta-iota.net can find the reviews, and they can read 2,500 reviews sorted in various interesting ways. And that's the best thing I think I've done other than my books.
Wonderful. Well said. Thank you so much. And all the very best to you. Take care.
All right. God bless. Be
God
strong.
bless. Okay.